So let's review a great way to make chords and melodies. Sound selection is extremely important. It's probably one of the most important factors when it comes to getting good sounding music. There's tons of different VSTs that have great sounds in it. Turn up swing just a bit to give it a more realistic sound. So sometimes I'll start out with the bass notes and sometimes I'll start out with the chords themselves, but for this example I just started out with the bass notes. So the first note in the chord is going to be the 1, number 1. From there, going up the scale, as you see, there's the darker lines. Those are the notes that you don't want to use. Unless you're trying to go for like a jazz type of vibe and use non-diatonic notes, then go for it. So from here I have the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, and the 5. That's a basic triad chord. If I put this note up 1, that would be a major instead of a minor chord. And you can tell by the distance between notes, between the middle note and the bottom note. And for this example, I took the middle notes and I pitched them up an octave. That gives it a more emotional feeling, to me at least. And then after you have a basic chord pattern that isn't very interesting, you could start to add something called filler notes. And you could start chopping up the actual chord notes themselves. This is where the grid comes in handy a lot because you can kind of line up exactly where you want them. And you can also quantize the notes if they're not precisely on the grid. And that would be very useful if you're playing an actual instrument. So now we've converted that original pattern into this. And a good tip, at the end of a lot of songs, it's kind of common to use the root note of the scale to end off the chord or the song, just depending on what you want to do, because it gives it the illusion that it's being resolved. This is a complex version of this basic chord progression. I have the regular chord progression here. I might do that for the intro just to kind of get the actual sound of the frequencies ingrained instead of being complex with, you know, a bunch of different notes being played, because then it's kind of harder to follow. But if you have the original chord progression, it's easier to add more without the listener being confused as to like what's going on. So a great place to put just the simple progression is in the intro, the bridges, the outro, and then maybe occasionally in a chorus. And there are a ton of different ways you could take this from here, because you could chop up the same chord a million different ways, literally an infinite amount of ways. There's no real limit to timing of anything, so because you could fractionate everything down to an infinite number. But obviously at a certain point it would just be like a wave, and then at another point it would just be a line, so it wouldn't really be anything. But you kind of get the concept of what I'm trying to say here. If you found anything useful, make sure you drop a like.